Hello, everybody. This is B for Belarus program on Primus Radio, and our beloved guest, Vladimir Baranich. Vlad, hello.
Hello.
This time we are going to discuss the issue of Belarusian Revolution of Order and Dignity 2020. It's a tentative name. There is no official name like Rose Revolution or Velvet Revolution around, but we can just discuss this issue. What's so peculiar about the Belarusian Revolution? Let me remind you that a couple of months ago, even like in the beginning of the year, we discussed different aspects of Belarusian society, Belarusian people, and we emphasized the passive nature of Belarusian national character. Belarusians are tolerant, Belarusians are inert in many ways. They were not that active in politics, reacted quite passively to what's going on, and finally things got in flames in 2020. How could you explain this phenomenon? What changed in the perception of Belarusians of the situation that we've been living in for over 20 years, and suddenly, as many people argue, we are witnessing the birth of the Belarusian nation?
Well, first of all, I'd like maybe make some sort of disclaimer, because
sure.
Talking about the revolution, I would probably put it into quotation marks, because it's more like a figure of speech, because we don't see something revolutionary happening. We see probably there is a revolutionary shift in perception of people we're talking about. But if we look at, and again, you asked why this, why it could happen. So the main reason, I think, because the change of generations. It's mostly people who are now protesting of the younger generation, the middle 20s, 30s. Very few people of older generation. Like mine, because we've seen a lot of unrest, a lot of things happening in the past, but not so so active. So I would say it's very interesting phenomenon. It's more like natural, because we don't see apparent leaders in this.
But there is a kind of formally there was the elections were rigged and falsified, and we have a lot of facts and evidence of that. But at the same time, the 80% that blew minds of Belarusians completely for Lukashenko allegedly support. And then this cruelty, atrocity, murder and torture, rape of men and women in prison. Something that could hardly explain and justify by any means. And so far, 40 days after these horrible events, not a single criminal case was opened against police, while police argue that they were provoked and they suffered. And recently, Minister of Internal Affairs drafted amendments into the legislation to protect policemen from prosecution and civil protests. That's what's going on. So this kind of injustice that people were shown was a kind of huge humiliation of Belarusians. And I think that's one of the Belarusian poets said that we keep patient, we tolerate pain and everything, but suddenly somebody shouts, "Guys, get guns and let's get going." So how far Belarusians are to that moment when they say we're sick and tired of this situation, we value our dignity, it's high time to start this decisive fight for our freedom. Because as some people argue, in European legislation, historically, people have the right to revolt against Tsar or king or any power that abuses lives of the people.
Well, there are so many questions in one time, would say, to answer them.
Let's go one by one.
Yeah, because this, first of all, what's important, what we see now, unlike in past, everything is going on online. And it's going, and so, and this, authorities are so scared by this online coverage that they disable internet. They just disconnect internet, which is insanity by itself in our age of information, of, cloud technologies, everything. It's just pure madness. It's just lunacy, because to disable internet, it's like 50 years ago would be disable regular telephone lines or even electricity, because some businesses just can't function without the internet. Well, let's say everybody has cloud technology in their pocket as a mobile phone. It synchronizes with with Google account, and which sometimes you can't even make a call because there is a telephone somewhere stored, telephone number stored there online. So on one hand, this going on, the whole world can see everything, these atrocities, and everything is available now. There are a lot of foreign media writing about this.
Journalists were beaten, were tortured. Women, children, even this software guy, IT specialist, he was raped, and he documented that. And still, police reject these accusations. UN considered Belarus and said that we have over 450 documented cases and 6 missing people and murders. And still, Lukashenko meets Putin. They discuss things as if nothing's going on, and Lukashenko, the Kremlin recognizes Lukashenko as a legitimate president. At the same time, we see this for the first time. European Union, Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland do not recognize Lukashenko as a legitimate president. What consequences, what ramifications could it have for us?
Well, for us, when we call it about for us,
for Belarusians.
Belarusians, again, Belarusians is quite general term, because there are those who are for the regime and those who are against the regime, those who are passive, those who are active, who are walking on streets in spite of all these dangers, atrocities, being fined. What we see, actually, what we see now is interesting phenomena that people taking part in this revolution, they have no leaders. They have no Lenin
decentralized
on a truck, speaking to the crowds. Just we see some leaders, formal leaders, they appear to be no leaders at all. They're just symbols, like Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is considered by some as president-elect, who took over the majority of those votes which could be counted.
But we don't have any documented evidence of Tikhanovskaya victory. We have a lot of kind of indirect evidence.
Yes, indirect.
Those IT platform, protocols.
Those stations where counts were really counted. So they see that she won there. But at the other, those results were destroyed. So we don't.
But that's it. Lukashenko also, he claimed that he had won. But again, if there is a demand for a recount of votes, there is nothing to count.
Well, papers were, just put through a shredder.
Are you surprised by the resilience and perseverance of Belarusians that have been fighting against this regime for over about 40 days. So things started on the 9th. I would say that things started earlier when we had dozens of thousands of people taking part in demonstrations countrywide. It's not about Minsk. It's about all regional cities. It's about smaller cities where people took out to the streets and expressed their indignation and their determination to have a better life.
Well, this, a lot of external things have contributed to this, like this COVID-19 isolation.
Yeah.
It also put its input into this phenomena, because a lot of people were confined. They had lack of social communications. Now they can go outside and just communicate, like they can go and walk to talk to other people. Again, in past maybe they could just move to other countries to work. For example, a lot of those guest workers. The different estimations, maybe 1 million of them who would go to Russia to work, Russia or other countries like Poland or etc., to work there. Now they stay here without any means for existence. So their bitterness, and they have. It's like they see no other solution. They just but to do something about the current situation in Belarus, and businesses are being closed, businesses can't function.
Yeah, IT sector, 300 IT specialists declared that they are leaving for Latvia alone. We have other countries that Lithuania is making it much easier to get visas. They rely on IT.
Of course,
inflow
IT specialists, when the main tool of main IT tool is internet is being disabled abruptly. That's how shall you behave if your main tool is taken away from you?
That's right. But now you are kind of an expert in the nature or the character of Belarusian. What makes Belarusians so different this summer compared to what we saw in 2015, 2010, 2006, and other periods when political environment, legal environment, and the way elections were run were not different from 2020?
Well,
but this time
it was so evident. It was like it was so evident that these elections were rigged, because if, for example, official elections were announced like 55%, but the current president won by 55%, not by 83 or how much? 83, I guess. It was the official number. So for many people, it's like, putting somebody's head into the shit. Somewhere you're just. It's like they felt their dignity was abused, and they were denigrated by such behavior. And what's interesting about this phenomenon, actually, I was surprised. I thought,
that's right.
It was a great surprise for me that such mass of people, unorganized, they go outside and they don't even protest. I
think that the Belarusians, wake up to the idea that they have neighbors, they are one nation, and there are other things that are valuable for them than their income, their close family. So this kind of, is it like collective resistance to evil that emerged graphically and stood up, hiding the sun and old virtues?
What's interesting here, again, many pay attention to this, is mostly women-driven. If you see, there were three formal leaders, three ladies, heroes. They were depicted in propaganda. In positive propaganda. And we can see on streets there are women who are very active, and they stand against police. They cry out. They, like hysterically reacting to this brutality of the police. And that's something very unusual. We have to pay attention that this, let's call it revolution, okay, just all these protests, they're not organized. They are naturally driven.
Well, that's kind of but they've been around. They get out of to the streets for 6 Sundays in a row, right? And so we can see that they're maybe 10 or 20,000 people less, but still over 100,000 people countrywide take part in protests, and they are determined to go to the end. The protests do not turn more violent or rude. So there is no end right now. So we are in this deadlock or political crisis. Lukashenko went to meet Putin. Putin promised him $1.5 billion, promised him support, said that he recognizes Lukashenko as a legitimate president. But that's it. So there's nobody. Russia doesn't have any answer to what should be done in Belarus. Obviously, Putin is facing the situation when many people in Belarus would consider him as a partner of Lukashenko in seizing, grabbing power in Belarus.
That's a great shift in mentality, in attitude toward Russia. You know what? That time, like 20 years ago, there was even not 20, like 30 years ago, there was popular leader of the Popular Front, Zenon Pozniak. He's now in the United States in exile, and he once published an article. There was an article called about Russian imperialism, and it caused a great let's say protest against it. Was like nationalist, fascist, etc. And due to that sentiment, Lukashenko won because some of people, they voted for him because they didn't want that so-called nationalist to take take over, to become a president, and to with his slogans of Belarus as a sovereign nation, with Belarusian language as the main language, because some people were unwilling to study that language, which is now extinct. But now, and actually there were, we had sort of called fifth column, or fifth, this pro-Russian, how to call it, pro-Russian mentality, pro-Russian-minded people here in Belarus, and they would say, "Oh, Russia is fine. Russia shall, establish their leaders here, and they shall go into power." But now we see that. What that guy, nationalist so-called, he couldn't do, now Putin did. Just the outrage against Russia is so huge.
It will be much stronger and more intense if people realize that the only country, the only government in the world that supports Lukashenko and his regime is Russia, and
actually it is
Putin personally.
It is alive. This regime is still on. Let's say on float. It is still has not lost control over the situation, because it feels supportive of the Russia, of Russia, of the Russian, military forces, because Putin promised military support, or at least paramilitary, because he said he would, send some police. I don't know what kind of force he promised to send.
Paramilitary, force structures that kind of, in the Ukrainian language, there's the word titushki. So these are the people who are dressed in civil, kind of normal clothes, but
because he said some reserve of police, so I don't know who those people would be. And of course, in such conditions. Peaceful people, they stand against absolutely brutal military force. Just the level of violence is just incredible.
How do you see the future of the protest? So in the first part of the protest, the workers joined demonstrators and they were quite active. There were some strikes in major Belarusian state enterprises. Right now, all the state enterprises work without any breaks. Strikes are gone. At the same time, we are entering a new phase of the social economic crisis. I think that there will be a lot of constraint and pressure in the financial system. There is no way for the Belarusian government to increase wages and pensions, so there will be the people who believe that stability is fine, the government meets all its obligations and commitments, so we showed our discontent and rage, but now it's time to get back to work. Will it be business as usual for Belarusian authorities by the end of the year, or will it be a kind of a radicalization of the protest, the opposition in a broader sense of the word versus the government? And Lukashenko personally.
There are some signs that such a radicalization is going on, because if we look, there are some, videos available and some, stories happening, appearing on internet that there was, guys, tough guys on, in certain, on background regions, for example, in those areas, like in small cities, and even in Minsk, in those areas, on living areas where police could not go in, because there are young guys who would forcefully fight with police. I don't know how truthful are those stories. But some radicalization is possible, because bitterness, and people see that. Let's say police. We don't see police on streets. We see some guys dressed in masks. We can see their faces. We don't see their police outfit. They're with clubs, they smash windows. In one cafe, we could see there was a head of the police department, and but most of those who are, seizing people on streets and beating them, they're not dressed like police. They're dressed like ordinary civilians.
Civilians, right? Nobody knows whether people are kidnapped from the streets.
Like bandits. And this resembles the situation in Gaiti, it's where this Papa Duvalier, Papa Duke, he had his Taton Makuts. The same, brutal force, which were, beating people and even killing people.
Vlad, we are in this period of conflict between civil society and society in general, and Alexander Lukashenko regime, and this is like a standoff between the two sides. Will it get worse? In terms more brutality, more detainment, more torture, or there will be some urge to start a meaningful dialogue between the parties after Lukashenko-Putin meeting? Because right now, obviously, the Kremlin will not play the role of an intermediator or moderator between the conflicting forces inside the Belarus, as Putin does not recognize any other force, only Lukashenko. And so right now we are, some people argue that this kind of conflict made Belarus much more vulnerable to Russia's pressure and to possible erosion of independence. And on the other hand, many Belarusians argue that it's Lukashenko's fault, that he forged and rigged elections, that he used brutal force against his people, that he fails to recognize reality. And so this is the conflict that leads Belarus, can tear Belarus apart. How do you see that? It's not the time to right now to kind of of increase the pressure inside the system, which is our country. It's the time to find some plausible solutions and the way out of this dangerous situation when it not only a future of Lukashenko and his family is at stake, it's the future of Belarusian independence is at stake.
I wouldn't talk about Belarusian independence because they say there is Anschluss, there is like
maybe,
Russia is going...
Maybe.
No,
talking about this
why?
threat, danger.
Russia is not interested actually in taking over Belarus because Belarus is already a puppet state. Mm-hmm. It's Russian background. Russia is, supports it financially and dictates everything what's going on here. So without Russia, all these brutalities wouldn't take part. Russia supports Lukashenko all the time now, and even they gave him $1.5 billion as support, financial support. Today, even the Russian Duma approved that allocation of that money. So we see that Russia is the only guarantor of this regime. So and at the same time, the Western countries, especially like the EU and the United States as well, they do nothing about it. They just say, well, we'll do some sanctions. Indignation, nothing. It's just, toothless attitude. It changes nothing. Russia, if the West could say, okay, this is something, you can't do this. You can't.
But it's like, but what could the West do against the Kremlin that poisons people like Navalny, for example? There is like strong evidence that Navalny was poisoned, and this kind of poison is available only to the people who belong to fascism.
That's the point. Russia
and Russia now is the only foreign power that has direct contacts with Lukashenko and supports him directly. So how could you explain? This is like pragmatic calculation, or is it like generosity toward Lukashenko in order not to just support him personally, but to prevent this kind of scenario in Russia? Because Russia is not a stable country, it's not a fastly developing country, it has its own problems, it is in state of stagnation, and it is far from being an example for us to follow.
You see, Russia understands, because Belarus, remember, Lukashenko once announced, and he's very popular in Russia, and he once said that Belarusians are Russians with the quality mark. Well, it refers to the Soviet times when quality mark was a special mark of something made with with very, very good state
high
guaranteed quality. Yeah, there was such symbol resembling, this anyway, it just announced that Russians consider Belarusians as the quality marked or quality Russians. So for Belarus, for them is something they consider it like their own. And if Belarus follows Ukraine, going against Russia, for them it's something unacceptable. They just the whole empire falls apart, and apparently this could cause to the fall of Russian regime of Putin, and actually we see very strong intentions of those regional powers in Russia, like if you look in Khabarovsk, there is great unrest there for the
But still, the people protest against the Kremlin, but the Kremlin seems
but they're very strong mood, I would say, for regional independence. Which they say, for example, well, Siberia is self-sufficient, or Urals is self-sufficient.
We have enough oil, diamonds,
Why shall we pay to Moscow?
Raw natural resources.
And there are regional oligarchs who would be glad, to become owners of all that.
Tsars. Of Siberia.
Probably
just imagine what kind of mayhem can arise if such tendencies get more intense.
So Putin is afraid that if Belarus goes away from Moscow influence, all this will cause a chain reaction in Russia, and Russia will just fall apart like Soviet Union, like disintegrate completely. So in Belarus is kind of a battleground for Putin's regime, actually, not for this local one. So,
there is an interesting opinion poll called World Value Survey 7th Wave, and that was definitely done before this summer political events, but many, for example, people were asked about the attitude to different aspects. For example, how do you see whether you trust fully or partially different institutions, for example, legal and judicial system. In Belarus, fully and completely trust to legal and judicial system is about 58%. Do you think that will change? Like, trust to the government was about over 50%. Trust to political parties was less, and trust to parliament was about 45%. How do you see the change in trust to different institutions of the government, irrelevant of who holds them?
I think that a certain Rubicon has been crossed with all these atrocities, with all these absolutely unacceptable lawlessness, which was done by those who are supposed to protect the law, by judges, by police itself. Police behaving like bandits, it's just
But what are judges? Judges ignore law completely.
Yes.
They just, they're like part of these KGB troika in Stalin times.
It's just even worse, because it's something in Stalin times. There was police, those NKVD, KGB guys, they were dressed like police. We would say, this enforcement, as state enforcement. They were in uniforms. Now we see some guys with masked faces, they're in these balaclavas. You can see even their faces. And when people like these women on street try to take away their masks, they run away like vampires, being exposed to the light. And this means that they realize they do lawlessness.
There was one interesting question again in this survey, whether people are interested in politics. And people are very much interested in politics in Belarus. 8.5%, a little bit, 34.6%. That means about 43% of Belarusians were interested in politics, 43%, but most of the Belarusians, or majority, still were not interested in politics. Do you think that Belarusians would change this attitude to this aspect of their life?
Well, gradually, in every family, even relatives, there are things they discuss. Well, if something's going on, people on streets and everything is such mass events, of course they will be discussed somehow or other, because they say, well, if you talk to anywhere, people would see, they show it on TV. Well, certainly this agenda will make people more aware of politics. They'll have to to come out or come out from this comfort zone where they were like in escapists area with virtual reality, I would say, like they would live in their own cocoon with their family stuff. But here we see that somebody among their family was beaten, or there was a policeman who was, taking part in that. Or remember, we have a lot of police, and in many families they are members. And now we read some stories like families fall apart because a wife, for example, doesn't want to like with the sadist husband. Those people are really insane if they if they beat unarmed people on streets with such brutality. If they, for example, rape people with this police, just buttons. This it just it's
horrible.
Horrible.
These are crimes against humanity.
That's apparent. I mean, this is something which and they cross the line where they understand they can't go back because they will be persecuted by any future legitimate regime.
Yeah, but it's like, as we know from Dostoevsky, crimes must be followed by punishment.
That's what I mean.
Do you believe that when will these criminals face justice?
Like 2 months ago, I would be more pessimistic. Now, looking at what's going on, I was not expecting such mass uprise, such mass. Not even a prize, such mass willingness to continue, determination to continue, apparently, how to say...
fight for freedom.
Not for freedom. I mean, in spite of apparent futility of that, because these peaceful people standing against armed people who are absolutely brutal and have no limits, and everything is allowed to them. But we still see no violence on from the other side. I mean, from the population. Of course, on one side, we don't see this opportunity like taking arms. Our people are completely disarmed. They have no access to weapons and firearms. But if the general mood would go in this direction, I think it is very much possible that some colonel, army colonel, or somebody else would think, well, that's enough. Let's take my tank division and go out and fight against, because we don't know what moves people inside. For example, there's some colonel whose brother was like killed or tortured.
Yep.
Who knows what he would think about it? And because there is no end.
He can turn more violent.
Yeah, so
he can seek revenge.
Apparently, I think that the only possible solution, Russia could interfere and they could mitigate this crisis because Russia plays the major part in this. So they could say, well, okay, you guys just calm down and let us form.
Yeah, but you look at what's going on around. They are far from being pacifists. They do not address civil society directly. They talk to the authorities. They do not. Putin wanted to emphasize the importance of this humanitarian mission. He would say publicly to Lukashenko, let's investigate all crimes that happened in Belarus, irrelevant who committed them, people in uniform, special troops, or whoever. But right now we see over 1,000 documented cases, not a single criminal case opened by General Prosecutor's Office. It's outrageous. People deny, policemen like this guy who is head of Akrestino prison in Minsk. He said, no torture happened. That just happened. It's like we have thousands of people providing evidence, ready to give evidence and testimony in courts under oath. And these guys in uniform, they deny everything.
I think, as I said, we crossed the Rubicon with no point of return, because and if this goes on and on, I think there will be radicalization and more, and it is just only time. It is a matter of time when there will be blood First blood we've seen us just without return.
People were murdered.
But as I say, there are a lot of people who went through military training. Remember, there are people who went through those paramilitary, how they were called, formations in Ukraine.
Unit, right.
In Ukraine, because many of them who were radically minded, they went to what is called this anti-terrorist, what is it called, anti-terrorist operation, right? And so they took part there. So we don't know where they are and what they think about it. So
I think that we can conclude that Belarus and Belarusians face very considerable uncertainty, a lot of nervousness, still powerful and strong and ruthless regime. Belarusians will have to get together to persevere in their fight for freedom. Otherwise, we are facing a very anxious future with a lot of actors acting against freedom, against justice. And there is no predetermined positive outcome. So we have to face it that we've been ignoring politics for many years. We were not active. We did not join political parties, civil society groups. Finally, we wake up to face very brutal reality, and reality is still there. And things may change in different ways, may turn nastier, may turn positive. We don't know what, but if there's one thing, if Belarusian society keeps being very active, this factor cannot be ignored neither by Lukashenko nor by the Kremlin.
I would dare even to say that, and I'm not the only one in this, that we see now something like the birth of a new nation.
Yep. That's what I
very strange, because we used to talk about Belarusians as kind of nationless society. There was no nation as united by one language, by one national idea. There was nothing like that. National language is gone, national idea is gone. People would consider them something like Russians. But now see that a lot of people have this self-awareness. For example, they use their symbols, which existed less as state symbols, like white, red, white flag, and the same coat of arms called chase, which is used in Lithuania, because we had the common history with Lithuania. But what's interesting, just pay attention, there are no EU flags on streets.
No NATO,
there's no
EU,
nothing. No EU sentiment, because EU have...
That's not about geopolitics, that's about humanitarian...
No, that's interesting that people consider that. For me, it's very interesting phenomenon, because people see that EU, which in past, those rallies were driven in many cases by this so-called organized opposition, which was paid by foreign grants, for example, EU grants, or American, were financially supported by EU, for example. They would say, they would call those organizations like European Path or European Choice or whatever. They always used to have these European flags, and they would say, let's take Belarus to Europe. Now, since most of the population, they have nothing to do, we don't see those opposition leaders with those flags on streets. They just disappear.
Right.
They are not visible at all. They don't know where they are.
That's what makes us believe this is a unique people's protest, decentralized, genuine, driven by internal factors, nothing connected with any foreign power.
And that's where the thing is here, that since there is no leadership, you can't predict how the crowd would behave, how the popular mind would where would it go? So we don't know.
We will be looking closely and following the events in our country, taking part in that, informing people and evaluating the situation and outcomes, possible outcomes. There is no easy solution, of course, and we are looking forward to Belarus' future. We rely on assistance and solidarity, compassion of all our friends worldwide, and may dictatorship fall and may freedom prevail. Thank you, Vlad, for your input. Vlad Baranich, media analyst and expert on our country, took part in the program Before Belarus. This time we discussed the major theme, Belarusian Revolution of Order and Dignity 2020. It is still in progress. Hopefully it will not become part of our history textbooks by the end of this year. It will give us new opportunities and chances that Belarusians definitely deserve. Thank you. Stay with us. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.